I would say the first half of my life was a pretty traumatic time for me. I think I don't think I knew what the word depressed was, but I think I was just used to that being my life. Like I didn't think life could get any better than that constant state of sadness.
Yeah.
It wasn't until I grew up and I started asking the deeper questions, like why not me? Why is this happening to me? That I started realizing that I could get out of it.
Welcome to the Improving Humans podcast, where improving humans share their stories, experiences, and lessons to help other humans improve. Today I'm joined by Vinita Hazari. She is a professional dance performer, teacher, and all-around artist whose brand has amassed hundreds of thousands of followers online, hundreds of millions of video views.
Wow.
She's taught in cities in pretty much every major part of the United States, gone on a couple international tours, actually gave me my first break in terms of being able to perform in front of a class. I could go on, but not just because of her immense work ethic and her incredible talent, but there's a defining word that's helped sort of propel her professional success and also personal success, and that word is manifestation. So I am super excited to be able to talk to you about that journey today. Appreciate you opening up about it, and thanks so much for joining me.
I'm so excited to be here. This is so exciting. My home has turned into a little podcast studio.
I'm super pumped for this. So before we sort of talk about your journey, I wanted to start with some basic definitions for the audience. So if someone's never heard of manifestation before, doesn't even know what the concepts involved, what's like a basic understanding of what manifestation actually is?
The best way I explain manifestation to someone that's never heard of the word and like just uses it as the US history manifest destiny term is it's basically you create the reality that you want. So everything that you envision, if you can think of it, it's real. And basically I kind of give like a video game analogy where it's like you're creating your own Sims life. It's the same way you create the world that you want to live in. So every thought you have, whether it's positive or negative, manifests or translates into real life.
When I was doing some readings on manifestation, there was a concept that was pretty important with manifestation, which was the importance of belief when you're sort of manifesting. And it actually made me think of us as kids. I think there's a lot of us, like when you're a kid, you actually genuinely believe the things that you're saying, whether it's like, what do you want to be when you grow up? And if someone says they want to be in the NBA or they want to be like whatever it is, they genuinely believe that. And I think as you get older, sometimes like some of those beliefs get constricted. As far back as you can remember, were you a generally like aspirational person? Did you have, dreams, things that you were aspiring towards even as a kid?
No, actually, I was a pretty negative child. I think it was just the way I was raised. Like, you have to work hard to be successful, and hard work means you have to struggle a lot. I mean, I think all of us can relate. We have immigrant parents. So my dad worked really, really hard. My mom worked really, really hard. My dad's family didn't come off from a well-to-do family, so he basically grinded and hustled to support his entire family. And I think that's how I grew up believing, like, if I didn't do anything where I grinded and hustled and, struggled, I wouldn't make anything of myself. So that was a belief that I took a long time to dispel. So my whole childhood was based off of that. But I will say, I think children are the best manifestors because they don't have rules. It's the moment you form societal connections that your manifestations kind of get broken and you have to relearn the whole concept of it.
That makes sense. And I kind of want to start off, like you said, it's children are some of the best manifestors, and then as they grow and evolve, sometimes limitations are placed on them. It could be self-placed limitations or maybe things other people tell you. As comfortable as you feel like sharing, what were some of maybe the limitations that were placed on you early on, whether it was your own beliefs about yourself or things people had told you?
Well, I was really overweight as a kid to the point where it was like a health issue, and I didn't believe I was good enough in anything. Like, I used the weight to give me excuses. I went to a school where I was, kind of the smarter one, but then I went to a gifted school and I was not the smartest, and it became like I was constantly struggling. So I manifested that struggling. I think I manifested being bullied because I used my weight as an excuse for why I didn't have any friends. So definitely those kind of limitations were put on me. I kept telling myself I wasn't smart unless I studied hard. So if I didn't study for a test, I kind of knew I would do poorly because I didn't slave away at it. So I think kind of opening my realm to the scope of you don't always have to struggle to get what you need in life, that completely changed my whole world.
That makes sense. And during that time when, you're dealing with sort of those issues, like How is it from a like mental standpoint also of like sort of those limitations being placed on ourselves in retrospect, looking back of like, you know, how difficult was that time to be able to navigate?
I would say the first half of my life was a pretty traumatic time for me. I think I don't think I knew what the word depressed was, but I think I was just used to that being my life. Like I didn't think life could get any better than that constant state of sadness.
Yeah.
It wasn't until I grew up and I started asking the deeper questions, like why not me? Why is this happening to me? That I started realizing that I could get out of it.
And I would love to know, this is more of a broad-based question of like understanding your journey of how you then go into sort of asking those questions and getting an understanding of what manifestation actually is. Like when did that happen? What point in your life, if you could paint that for me?
Yeah, so I actually didn't get into the theory of manifestation until 2019 and then very deeply into 2020 because we had time. But I will say I was always very religious curious. Like my parents are religious. Like as you can see, we have a lot of idols around the house, but they're not very religiously educated, if that makes sense. So they do the things because Dadi says to do them or Aji says to do them, but understanding the stories of the scriptures and everything behind it, that was me. So I would spend hours researching. I had like a copy of the Gita is actually the first known historical text of manifestation. So I think I was just destined to be born in a religion that manifestation originated from.
Right.
And I think Hinduism is one of the most misconstrued religions. I think it's gotten political. I think it's gotten so many things that have just become not from the original roots of it.
Right.
But I've always been interested in religious texts. Like that book over there is mine. The Sai Suchitra's book is mine. All those tattered books are mine. So I've just always loved reading about the concept of, you know, how religion tied into manifestation. I didn't equate it to manifestation until I started studying Joe Dispenza, and then I was like, he would quote the Gita, he would quote all these religious Hindu texts with yoga and stuff. So then I was like, oh, it does tie back. It's just not the way that I thought it would.
And when you're reading about it, is it really just from an understanding basis, or are there any practical applications that you're adopting early on, even if you don't realize it at that time? Like,
I think the first one was in the Sai Suchitra, was when it was like, if you want something, you can leave it to me. And I thought that concept was so crazy, but that's exactly how you kind of learn to manifest. Like you should just let it go to the universe. So whether it's a higher power, a god, or whoever you kind of think it would be. So I wanted something really small. I think I wanted so I attribute my first successful manifestation in fourth grade. I wanted a role in the lead of a play. So I imagined myself getting it, and I like thanked like my teacher for giving it to me, and I also like remember narrating the lines pretending I was on stage. I don't know why I thought I would be a doctor after that. That foreshadowed everything in my career. But I remember reading, my dad used to read the book, so I would read the book with him while he would read it out loud. And I remember just writing, I want the play, and I left it to him. And that's exactly what happened. So I think that kind of fueled there's something else controlling what happens. When I thought about it as an adult, I was like, I think that was my first successful manifestation.
wow. And sort of as you sort of, maybe even before 2019, as you're sort of reading these scriptures, sort of adopting what manifestation could be, what happens in 2019? Like what happens where it flips?
I wouldn't even say I was reading the scriptures continuously, because I was, I think every kid goes through a rebellious phase where they don't want to be Indian anymore. Every Indian American kid, especially. Luckily for me, I went to high school with a lot of South Asians and a lot of Asians. So I think I didn't really go through that extreme. I also worked for an Indian company, so I think I was pretty, I just was like, I'm too cool for all of this stuff. But in 2019, The Secret came out on Netflix. It came out in 2007. Wow. My parents had the book in 2007. They were like, you're too young for this. I was like a kid when it came out. But I ended up watching the documentary, and I was like, what do you mean? Like, it felt like woo-woo. But then it also changed my life in the most dynamic way. So yeah, I mean, it was just like profound to watch that documentary and realize that it's so simple. It didn't feel like, especially because it goes against the norms of like, we're taught we have to struggle, we have to work hard. Anyone that promotes hustle culture is never going to achieve anything in life, because you're constantly thinking about the fact that you have to show you have to work hard. And I'm a culprit of that as well.
That makes sense. And for anyone who hasn't seen that, like, what were some of the biggest takeaways that you took from watching The Secret?
So I always tell people it's kind of like levels of manifestation. So if they haven't, like most people are like, oh yeah, I know about manifestation because I saw The Secret. I feel like that's your gateway. But there's like first grade, second grade, third grade, fourth grade for manifestation. And as you go deeper, I would probably give Joe Dispenza like the highest level. Like he's the most complex because it goes into neurons and atoms.
Yeah.
But The Secret is probably like the most pre-K friendly way to get into manifestations. Essentially, the concept of if you want something, how would you feel if you already got it? Because you don't really want the thing, you want the feeling you have when you have the thing. And that's the simplest concept, but it's so profound at the same time.
I was in my readings. It was super interesting. We talked about this off camera of just like I've never really been big into physics, and I also like
Same here.
Still not very good at it.
Oh, same.
But reading about Joe Dispenza and actually reading about sort of like the physics behind manifestation was super super interesting. And what you said earlier about sort of the hustle culture and like working really hard. As I was doing my readings, there was two concepts that came out. One was sort of Newtonian manifestation, I think, and then one was sort of like quantum.
Yeah.
So Newtonian basically being like the cause and effect where like you're actually putting in like an immense amount of hard work and it's solely dependent on you, right?
Right.
Versus like the quantum part of it where it's you're focusing more on the feeling and like the universe will end up giving it to you. Have you navigated sort of those two principles? And like early on, it seems like it was the Newtonian route versus how it ended up.
I call myself a quantum manifester now because now it's like if I want, I've also tried this in my business. I think the most fruitful months in my business are when I work the least. So because I have the feeling of I already have it, so I don't need to work very hard. And it takes a lot of, I'm not saying you shouldn't work hard. I think you should constantly strive for stuff. Like I was just telling you, I'm recovering now from surgery and I'm like, I'm bored because I can't work. But it should be like because you want to feel fulfilled, not because you want to slave yourself, if that makes sense, right? I feel like as a society, we celebrate people that, slave away, give up their health, make huge sacrifices to show up for people versus prioritizing yourself, regulating your nervous system, resting. So I think in that way I've kind of shifted towards quantum manifestation because it is the feeling of the end, like the whole concept of the feeling of the end.
That makes sense. And I would love to break down sort of that work ethic piece because there was some quotes that I was reading about. One, this is more so on the religious side than the manifestation side, but this idea that you should work for what you pray for. So this idea that if you are going to pray for something, yes, there's sort of like a higher power or something that's going to be guiding towards like bringing that to you, but you also need to put in a little bit of effort.
Right.
I was wondering what your view on that effort piece was, because you did say like, some months where you're maybe not working as extensively, you still are receiving the things that you're getting. So how have you found that balance in terms of putting the work in?
I think it's the earnesty behind the work. Like when I work, I do this I dance full time.
Yeah.
I do brand deals full time. When I work and you see things as a paycheck, it's not as fruitful versus when you see things as a labor of love, it kind of just manifests into 10 times more of what I wanted. Like I 10x'd my business when I started thinking of how I could do things I wanted because I love to do them, not because I wanted money out of it. If that makes sense. And I'm not saying you shouldn't charge for your work, or you should every artist should absolutely charge for their work. But the moment I stopped seeing things as paychecks and started seeing things as opportunities, the paychecks came, if that made sense. And that's just my personal experience. But I think I manifested wealth because I thought it became easy. Like money was, I think we put a pedestal on the concept of money, but I think it's as easy to manifest as anything else, any other career goal.
Especially someone who's maybe listening to this now and they're like, hey, I would love to learn about manifestation, but also start some maybe simple things. I'm sure it's much more extensive for you now. And like you said, with that first grade, second grade, third grade, you're very well versed in terms of everything. But from the baseline level, what were some original things you started when you started manifesting, like personally, or things you were physically doing? Like how did that happen?
So I actually think fate kind of got me into manifesting because I was in a really low spot in 2020. I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. I was a college grad and I didn't know what I wanted to do from a career wise. I was working for a dance company, but obviously wasn't enough for a full-time job. I didn't want to go into medicine anymore. I was having like the basic career, and that was probably being in COVID, it wasn't like it was easy to go to like a networking event. I did end up getting a job in marketing, but I wasn't happy. And on my YouTube search pod, there was a Abraham Hicks, like, listen to this when you feel lost. Like I felt like it was I've never really believed in fate before that moment. So I listened to it, and I didn't know who Abraham Hicks was. I didn't know, like, it was just this animated video, and I was like, what the hell am I watching? And I watched one, then I watched another, then I watched another, then for the rest of the week, I was just listening to it consecutively.
Yeah.
Then I got my mom into it. So Abraham Hicks is what I would say is the first grade level of manifestation.
Gotcha.
It's basically this woman named Esther Hicks, and this is like what I recommend my friends, like her little videos when they want to learn about manifestation. It's this woman named Esther Hicks. She talks through this consciousness, and it sounds very wee-woo, so you have to get over that wee-woo concept, because I am a Virgo. I'm a logical mind, so it took me a while as well. She talks through this concept of Abraham, because she calls it quantum consciousness. I think is the best way to describe it. So people go up to her, like she has all these like little symposiums and meetups, conferences, and people come up to her with their problems, and through her, Abraham will talk and answer it.
Oh wow.
I got to see one like conference live, and it was magical. I am a very spiritual person, and I think I was very lucky that I was able to take my mom for that. It kind of changed her concept as well. And I think we were both pretty negative people before we started manifesting. So seeing her turn into a very positive person has also been very amazing. But yeah, Abraham Hicks was that 2020 kind of jump catalyst for me. And then I was just hooked. I've never learned I watched The Secret and I kind of forgot about it. But the fact that you could actually control your own life to me was, especially in the position that I was in, was so mind-boggling.
And for you, was it just like, and I'm just trying to boil it down in terms of how I've seen sort of maybe some of the techniques I've read about. Was it just like affirmations for you? Was it things you were writing down? Was it just mental notes you were keeping? Like, how did you first start?
So she calls the feeling of like a high vibration. So I always talk about there's vibrations to things. So when you're jealous of someone, it's a very low vibration feeling, which is, I kind of like, I could go on about this. Like, I think my whole friend group has transformed tremendously. Like, we don't spend time talking negatively anymore about, you should never, like, if you're talking negatively about someone, or you're like gossiping, or you're complaining, it's a very low vibe. Versus, when you feel really happy, or like I always say the best time to manifest is right after a dance class, because you're very happy in that moment.
The
like
endorphins are high.
So I always like joke, and it always works for me. Like I use post a good class to manifest. But she talks about being in the vortex, which is basically when you're in a high vibe place, nothing can go wrong. So you're in that like state of ultimate happiness. So you can basically manifest whatever you desire in that moment.
Wow, that's pretty powerful. And then is that something that I'm just genuinely curious, that you roped your mom into sort of early on, or is it after you sort of got a good understanding of it, you started explaining to her?
So I would listen. We lived together, so I would listen to the videos constantly, and then she'd just be like, "What are you? What are you watching? Like, are you getting initiated into a cult again, or something? Or what are you doing?" So I was like, what? I was like, I don't know how to explain this to you, but it's changed my life, because in a week of that, I got a job.
Wow.
Like a week of just trying that. And I was like, I can't believe, like, because everybody thinks, and I think this is something that anyone listening to this should really take home. Everybody thinks, oh, that can happen to that person, but it can never happen to me. And you should ask, why not me? Like, I think that's the most profound way to change, like, it can happen for me, and because it happened to them, it should be able to happen to me. So I kind of like made her just listen to them with me, and she was like, this is weird, this is crazy. And then eventually she started listening to them before bed, and then she kind of got into it. And then I went and I bought all of Esther Hicks books. They're very thick. I have them. They're huge. It took me a year to finish them, just because they're so dense in terms of compared to what she talks about on YouTube. And then I kind of graduated to other people, but she was with Abraham Hicks for a good 2 years. Like, she was so in love with her teachings that she didn't want to, their teachings, she didn't want to graduate.
That is incredible. So 2020, as I imagine, was a difficult time for a lot of people. And for you specifically, I mean, you're graduating school, You're trying to figure out what you're doing in terms of your career, and also for the career that you have now in terms of actually being like in person with people and being able to teach them, etc. It wasn't really a possibility, at least in like the first half of 2020. So like, how was navigating that aspect of it, where this is going to be your eventual job later, but like, how did you eventually sort of keep the course of, this is how I eventually want to get into dance?
I worked for a dance company for like 5 years at that point, so I had taught, but I was like, this is what I want to do. I want to teach on my own, and I want to teach in person. And I didn't admit that to myself yet. I think it was admitted to me through other people, because I was like, no, I have to have a and to be fair, I will say this on public record, my parents were very supportive of me doing dance full time. I was very blessed that way because I think they saw how much effort I put into content creation at that time. I was very, very passionate about creating upscale videos, and I, slaved to be able to afford extra videos. And I was just doing video production with my videographer. That is my day one, Mark. That's how I grew my whole brand. I attribute so much of my success to him. So we would just go to different locations and film videos. That was how I started, and I had a 9-to-5 to support that. And my mom was like, why don't you just do this full time? Because she would just see me at my 9-to-5, and I didn't hate it, but it just wasn't what I wanted to spend the rest of my life doing. It was very clearly like, this is funding what I love to do. So she's like, why don't you just do what you love to do and that be it? And I didn't think that, I would be able to afford the life I wanted to live with dancing. But I was like, why can't I manifest that? Like, why can't I, if I'm my own limiting belief, if I think that way?
And I love what you just said, limiting belief. Interesting concept that I was reading about. Can you just expand on what a limiting belief actually is?
Yeah, so a limiting belief is literally what it translates to. It's a belief that you hold so dearly, and it's embedded into your subconscious, that makes you think that you cannot have the thing, the person, whether it's a significant other, specific person, a monetary goal, a career. If you don't think you are worthy or capable of it, you won't manifest it.
Interesting. And how does, maybe you could speak to your own personal experience of sort of being able to overcome or get rid of a limiting belief. What does that process even look like? Because something that's deep in your subconscious that you may not even realize that you have at a current time, unless it's illuminated to you, is tough to overcome, right? So like, how did you, start to overcome those?
Yeah, so the best way I would explain that, it's kind of like that game where you're like, think of the first word. So a lot of people don't know their subconscious beliefs, right? So it's like, why? Because I'm not good enough, or I'm not pretty enough, or I'm not talented enough. Like, you have to think of, I play that game with myself, and I kind of record my first answer, and I'd be like, okay, this is why. Or if you really sit with yourself and like hear the first thought, because you're constantly talking to yourself in your head, right? So that monologue that you're having with yourself, if you're just patient, the voice will tell you what your subconscious belief is. And I was like, I didn't think I was good enough. And I kind of started reversing that thought by not only just training, but every time I had that thought, I would replace it with, well, I'm going to only get better from here. And if at that point, and then I kind of went into, at some point, I think Delulu, is this a Lulu? Because I think in the healthiest way, I was delusional. Even when I was working with my company, like looking back at those videos, I was terrible.
Yeah.
I was terrible. But in my head, I was so delusional, and I think I thought I was the best thing that ever happened. And I think when you're teaching as a kid, that really does it for you. But I got offered teaching very early. I was the youngest in our company. I was very hoity-toity about it. I was like, I got this job so young because I'm that good. And I think that fed into my delusion a little bit. And I think that helped me get the confidence to be where I am today, because I think teaching, I realized I'm very grateful that I can teach with confidence and ease when I talk in class. Like, I realized that's a skill that a lot of people really work towards having. And I think I was very lucky that I had that naturally, and I knew that was something in my asset, my toolbox. So I was like, how can I build from here?
I think it's so cool that you're open about talking about sort of the delusion piece, because that does factor into confidence sometimes. Like, even when we're going back to when we're children and they're the best manifestors, most of us as kids are sometimes delusional, thinking we can fly or we can do like all these sort of things. But actually, that's great because you don't limit yourself in that capacity. So it's probably actually a good thing at that time if there was like a little bit of delusion. That
I agree. Yeah. I think even now, if I want to do something, if I always kind of aspire to be slightly delusional, because like the logical mind will always be like, well, this is, you also think of how did another person do it? So how can I can follow like that. But I think we're so used to, even college. So you go to school, then you go to college, then you get a career. What if you break that cycle? You're not successful. But then you see some of the most successful people didn't go to college.
Yeah.
I have a college degree, and I'm not using anything I learned in college for my specific field of work.
Yeah. And then it also is an interesting territory, especially where you are in your career, but where you'll eventually go in your career as well, where you'll start to do things, whether it's from a video production standpoint or a class standpoint, the way you structure, etc. It's going to be completely new, actually, from the way someone else does it. So in that sense, you almost don't even have a point of reference sometimes at that point. So like you have to have sort of the confidence to sort of establish certain things, I imagine, right?
Yeah, so I've always kind of been a little bit of a rule breaker.
Right.
Whether that was like in my company, I wasn't allowed to do stuff, so I do it anyway. And I think I was definitely a rebel. I didn't follow the normal path of anyone else. I didn't see myself being in a cookie cutter box. So I wouldn't call myself an intentional rule breaker. I would call myself a questioner. So if I was told I couldn't do something, I wanted to know why. And if the reason wasn't valid to me, I would go ahead and break the rules. If I felt like I was being wronged, I would fight back. So that goes against, even to the point of like, I would never talk back to an elder, but it got to the point where I'd question it directly to them. I'd be like, well, we can have a respectful conversation. I think that kind of, that whole scope of things kind of changed the way I became. So yeah, I think that kind of being like, I kind of the odd one out kind of changed my whole scope of things. So even in New York, if I do something that's different for the first time, I'm not thinking, oh, what will this person say or what will that person say? My sole thought is, will this benefit the students? Because that's my goal at the end of the day.
Right.
I don't think everything I do is perfect, but if my only goal and my only intention is creating the best class experience, that doesn't mean I have to do what has been done before.
That makes sense. And you put out a good word, which is in my reading of like Dr. Joe Dispenza, in terms of, he talks about sort of like the clear intention piece with sort of the matching emotion, which leads to a powerful manifestation. Yes. Can you talk about sort of that intention piece? Because I think like the earnestness in which you go in with something and the intention is extremely important, especially when you are talking about things like manifesting wealth and things that can be seen as material or, lead to an inauthenticity, but actually like the source of where you're coming from that can actually be powerful and authentic. So like, can you just talk about that intention piece of how important that is?
Yeah. I also think it's, a lot of people, especially us, like South Asians, we think manifesting money is bad. Like money is bad. Money is the root of all evil. I don't think money will ever buy you happiness. Like I have bought so many things that I wanted for so long. Does holding the item give me happiness? For a second. It's like the arrival fallacy. It gives you like happiness for like 1 second, and then you're like, okay, well, I want something else. You're like a kid with a shiny toy. So in that way, I don't think money can buy happiness, but I think money is a tool for happiness. It can get you things that you want to achieve or want to have in your life. That being said, I think that changing the whole mindset of, okay, money is bad will always deter you from getting your manifestation, especially with manifesting wealth. I think putting money on a pedestal, because money is energy, will negatively impact your flow of money. So as someone who's manifested money and, using that tool to, travel business class, buy my mom expensive dinners, buy luxury items, I love money. I love talking about money. I think money should be more talked about. I think financial transparency is a thing.
Yeah.
I don't think you should compare your current financial status to friends. I was doing that in 2023, and it made me have such an unhealthy relationship with money. And I think what Joe Dispenza says, getting back to your point, it's also a really important thing, and he says this is in his books, with how you treat money, especially when you don't have it at the moment. So if someone has a lot of money, instead of looking at them like, especially if you see someone really rich, like if you see a rich kid, especially on TikTok or scrolling, let's say you see a rich kid that, is spending their trust fund money on a shopping spree, and it's mostly items that you want.
Yeah.
You can't look at them and be like, oh, this stupid kid, I can't believe them, I hate them.
Yeah.
That's a negative energy. It's just going to pull money further away from you. If you're like, oh, look, this kid has that. How good for them. I want that too. It's kind of like a magnet that's going to, bring it closer to you.
On February 15th, 2022, you announced on Instagram that you actually incorporated your name. So Vinita Hazari LLC, which I think was Yeah, which I think was
I
huge.
forgot about that.
Yeah, so I'd scrolled back pretty far in your Instagram, and I saw that, and I was like, wow, how incredible, because like I met you fairly after that, so like I've
Yeah.
seen the progression from them, but I can only imagine in that moment making a step like that it's a pretty powerful step to be able to incorporate your own name as part of a business, right? So
Yeah.
I would love to learn about, if you don't mind talking about it, like that specific moment of, that's a pretty big proclamation that you're making in terms of your business, what you're hoping to achieve for yourself. Were there any hesitations around that, or was that just a moment of like, I'm full on board with this manifestation I'm going for?
No, I will say a few months later, I kind of embraced the concept of failure. I think when you start out, you're like, I can't fail. I'm not allowed to fail. And I don't think I think not failing overall is a big thing. Like, I will always work and hustle to the last drop of sweat to make sure that my business stays afloat because I have so much passion towards it. Sure. But I think little failures here and there are great life lessons, and I think you should be allowed to fail. So I think at that moment I was like, okay, I'm going all in. I can never make a failure ever again in my life. This is it. This is the end goal. But that's not true. I've had so many failures since that moment. I've had so many business ideas that did not work out, so many failed relationships in terms of business partnerships, potential brand deals, so many like different failures in terms of things I wanted to try and like, you know, navigate through going beyond the scope of just teaching in the studio setting.
Yeah.
And I've also had so many successes, but I think I've learned more from the failures because when you get success, you get comfortable. When you get failure, you get the ambition to work harder.
Wow, that's pretty good. And I think one thing I also wanted to talk about is sort of manifestation pitfalls. So you talk about some like the changing your mindset in terms of how you're experiencing failure and learning lessons from them. Were there any things that when you were going on your manifestation journey that you realized like, oh, like maybe I did this incorrectly, or like this is maybe not the best way to do it, and I actually realized doing it this way is better? Are there any pitfalls that maybe people experience?
So I feel like once you start manifesting, like I got all of my best friends into it very recently. Like I give them my books and we talk about it, and I see when some of them go through the manifestation like frenzy where they're trying to find the method that kind of works for them. But you're constantly manifesting, whether you're good at it or whether you know about it or whether you don't know about it. You're constantly manifesting different things. So it's all based off of the thoughts you have in your head, if that makes sense. So you're constantly thinking about, like, if you're really nervous about a presentation that you have at work and you're constantly thinking about it going wrong, that's exactly what's going to happen.
Yeah.
Whether you know what the word manifesting means or not. So at one point, yes, I did, around that time, I did go through what's like the frenzy of trying to find the method that works for me, like the scripting, the journaling, the vision board, the writing it out, the visualizing in your head. And I went through so many, and like some would work really quickly and some wouldn't, but I realized it was just my own subconscious, right? I'm like, this is going to work. It has to work. Of course it's going to work. You can manifest anything in the blink of an eye. It just, your logical mind will stop you. Like, in theory, if I wanted, could I manifest a Rolls Royce outside the house in like 2 seconds? Yeah. Well, logically, my brain will be like, that's not possible. So it's not going to happen.
Right. What is scripting, and is that something you've ever done before?
So there's so many different ways to script. How I define it is you journal from the point of view of you already have the thing. So if you want to be a millionaire, you get really specific with it. So you script your day in the life of being that millionaire. Like, you know, you have the big mansion. What is it like? If you want the seaside facing mansion, you're looking at, like, you can hear the waves as soon as you wake up. So you go into as much detail, you visualize it as you script, and it doesn't, it's not magic, but it basically puts you into the brain waves of the person that has it. So you think like you have it, you think as like the person that can achieve it, and that's what gets you closer to it.
There's another term that I forgot to ask you about, which is the abundance mindset. Also super interesting to me, and you also talked about sort of the impact that it had on your business, where there was like a 10 times increase. Can you just talk about the principle of what an abundance mindset is compared to how most people may think?
Yeah, so I think as South Asians, we're really, really competitive. Like, we're taught to be competitive in school. I'm also half Sindhi, and Sindhis are the most unnecessarily competitive people. I said that so funnily because I was like, no Sindhis. And then my not only is my team, my admin, the one who runs my page, Jaya, is also Sindhi, but it's just so funny how many Sindhis are in my life. We're so competitive. We're like, no, like it's like a business mindset. I have to be really sneaky and stealthy, which is just not the case. But the abundance mindset is essentially what it sounds like. You can have the whole world plus the cake. So I work in a competitive field. The entertainment industry is very competitive,
Right.
but I don't view anyone else as my competition. And I think everybody can say that, but you can tell who means it and who doesn't. Like, I can have people copying my stuff to a T and not be fazed by it. I'll be annoyed. Sure, I'm human. It's my creative field, but I'll just be like, they're never going to be what I can be, or there's enough room for them to do this and me to exist. And if there's someone that, wants to, like, I always believe in a community mindset. So if people, like, especially my friends have asked, like, oh, someone else is teaching, are you worried about there being too many teachers? And I'll be like, no, I think we can, it's just like having a new member in your family. Like, why would you ever feel like there's too much? There's enough to go around.
But around 2 years ago, you actually posted a video talking about things actually going well. Like, you were manifesting things in your life, things are going great. But it was a very emotional time for you because you're dealing with sort of reconciling maybe some trauma from your past or things that you're dealing with. And I think there's probably a lot of people watching this who are like, hey, Vinny, like, I do want to start manifesting great things in my life, but I actually am just dealing with a lot. Like, there's things that I'm either reconciling or like, I don't feel like I'm on emotionally stable ground. So like, how can I appropriately manifest? I would love, if you don't mind explaining, just sort of the impact of sort of balancing that manifestation with, if you do have things going on in your life that maybe could impact sort of your thought process, your feelings, etc. Like, how did you balance that at that specific time?
Yeah, so I have been through a lot of stuff in my life. Like, without going into like too much detail to make this a very sad podcast, I have seen so much darkness in my life. I have definitely, I could write a tell-all book about all the shit that's happened to me. And like, very few people know. I think Tush is one of the 5-hand people that know, who also teaches and also went on your podcast. And like, some my friends call me Meredith Grey because I've seen so much darkness at such a young age. But I chose to, adopt a new personality and someone I could have used all that darkness to give me an excuse for being a negative person. But instead, I've taken that into, I create my own life. So I can make the next half of my life, or the next 2/3 of my life, I want to live forever. Really, really positive and really amazing, because I control everything that happens to me. And so I think if you ever want to go through manifestation and go through the whole process, you have to be ready for what I call the purge. And it's basically purging all of the negative things, the negative beliefs, and the universe will test you. So if you really want something, the universe will give you something really close to it, but not exactly it. And if you take it, do you really want what you really wanted in the first place? Like, little tests here and there, or something really unfortunate could happen, and it could really test your mental stability, your mindset. And it's kind of seeing if you're the person that's meant for it. So for me, I've always wanted to be famous, and I don't think there's anything wrong in admitting that. But I think I wasn't ready. The person I was 3 years ago wasn't ready for that, because I was a people pleaser. I was really emotional. I was really sensitive about my face, or like my looks, or what people would say about me. And I think I had to develop thick skin, and things had to happen in order for that to happen. Yeah,
I know. I appreciate you sharing that. And similar sort of idea, there was something that I was reading that I think Dr. Joe Dispenza said, and I want to read it to you because I don't want to like misquote it properly, but there's a concept that was interesting that he talks about. At the soul level, all experiences are actually neutral, so they aren't perceived as necessarily good or bad. Like, we may perceive them, like if something tragic happens, or if you lose a friendship, whatever it may be, we tend to perceive them through the lens of the human mind. So sometimes the soul will agree to take on a certain circumstance or situation, not for their own evolution, but for the evolution of another soul that they come into contact with. So this idea that like, you actually may be involved in someone else's process or someone else's journey, and you may be sort of a learning lesson for them, rather it being beneficial in sort of how we see it for us.
Right.
I was wondering if that's ever come across in terms of your manifestations as well, because you do interact with a lot of people, right? Whether it's students, it's relationships that you have, etc. Like, how is that sort of maybe thought process ever occurred to you?
I mean, I won't go into my friends' personal businesses, but I've manifested for my friends all the time, and I have had 100. Like, I think I'm more successful in that than I am with my own manifestations, because I wholeheartedly believe that I can do it. I've seen my friends reconcile with families, like relationship stuff, like getting their dream person when they didn't even talk to them. So I think that is such a big part of it. Manifesting for another person is so much more fun because you're doing it so selflessly.
Right.
And it's fun to do. Like, I always tell someone, like, let's say you're the person you're trying to manifest for had a fight with a loved one. I imagine them talking to their loved one, or even easier, I imagine them calling me and being like, oh my God, everything worked out. Always works out. Like, give it a week, they'll be talking to that person again.
Wow.
At least in all of the instances I've had. So yeah, that, and I think the Hinduism concept that I really believe in comes into play. I believe in rebirth. So I believe every person in my life I've met for a reason, whether it's my best friend, whether it's a teacher, whether it's a significant other, whether it's your parents. I think you're meant to meet this person for a reason. Even the ones that have caused me so much pain and so many like dark moments, I believe I think the universe will keep bringing that person back until you learn your lesson.
I was wondering about that role of gratitude in your life, because you do talk about sort of the earlier experiences of maybe like you being more on the negative side and like not having gratitude. And I just want to know the evolution, or the impact rather, of gratitude that it's had in your life just generally.
I think I was always a glass half empty person. And then the moment I started, I think you can have two people look at a day the same way, and one person will talk about everything that went wrong. And one person will talk about everything that went right. And the best example I can give is, I remember my friend was complaining about a negative comment she received. And I was like, oh, really? Because I don't even read my comments anymore. I'm unfazed. The internet can be such a beautiful place, and it can also be such a cruel space. It depends on what you look at it as. But I remember there was one negative comment, and there were like 15 positive comments on her post. And I was like, did you read all the other stuff? And she was like, yeah, but this one person. And I was like, so you're going to spend your whole day thinking about this one thing. So it's very easy, right? People can shower you with praises, but you can spend your whole day thinking about the one person that was like, oh, you look kind of weird today, you know? Like, so I think shifting into that person, becoming kind of seeing little things that I could be grateful for, whether it's the air in my lungs, whether it's the fact that I get to dance for a living, little things, even when life can seem so crazy and so hard. Like, even when I was losing my aunt this past year, I was like, wow, I am, like, even when I felt like I had to take care of my entire family, I felt like the whole weight of the family was on my shoulders. I felt so grateful to just have legs and to be able to breathe, because she wasn't healthy at that point. And I was like, wow, this woman just wants to live in this condition, and I don't think I can ever complain for anything again. It's such a blessed feeling to be able to live. So I think that also really surcharged my gratitude scale. Seeing such darkness will always now give me more light, if that makes sense.
That makes sense. And as you sort of have manifested things in your life, how, just genuine curiosity about the timeline of manifestation, like, do your manifestations range from there's short-term manifestations to long-term, like decades from now? Like, how do you define sort of your manifestation timeline?
Well, it all depends on what you think you can achieve. So in my mind, I mean, I'm still a logical human in terms of as much as I wouldn't like to be. So if I think I can't achieve this right now, I think this is a 5-year thing.
Okay.
Or even as like, for my vision board, I have romantic stuff on there. I don't want to be engaged next year. I would like to be in a relationship, but I don't want to be engaged. I think that's too soon. So I wouldn't put a ring, my hand with the ring photoshopped on it. I think that's too soon. So that would be something I would manifest. I would still have it on my board, but it'd be like further to the corner for something I'd want in like 2 or 3 years, if that makes sense. So in that way, I like to like time that out, just because I could meet the love of my life tomorrow, but logically, I don't think I'd be ready emotionally to take a jump like that in 365 days. So that's something I'd maybe want in 2 or 3 years. So that'd go in the corner. If I want something really big career-wise and I don't think it's physically possible, I will put it in a 2-year window until it feels a little less impossible. Also, if I keep asking the how will this happen, I know that I'm not there yet. Because with manifestation, I've learned to not ask for the how and just kind of let it happen to me.
That makes sense. And you do actually have a book next to you, so
Yes.
The World is a Mirror. I would love to know about that book and why it's, so close to you proximally, but also having read it.
Yeah, so I always say there's Joe Dispenza, there's Neville Goddard, and I also love this book by Nada Amari. I think it's the easiest. I actually kind of give this book as a default because I've been explaining manifestation so much to my friends.
Yeah.
So this book is so easy to kind of it's already so dumbed down because manifestation sounds simple, but it can get very complicated. So this is kind of my go-to book when I'm explaining stuff. It's all used up. I think I've lent it to the entire world by now. So it's kind of my way. And it also serves as a reminder for me, especially when I'm in a low vibe mood. I just kind of read this to reaffirm my own beliefs.
That makes sense. And I love that last piece you talk about, so reaffirming your own beliefs. So even someone like you who's well-versed in this, and you'll continue to learn and continue to adopt sort of that mindset and sort of learn as much as you can and expand and use that. But, when you do have those moments, maybe lulls, etc., like what do you do to sort of reaffirm outside of just like reading? Do you still go to conferences? Like, do you still keep up with the latest?
I don't anymore, just because of time, but
Yeah.
I think I listen to a lot of podcasts. I listen to a lot of videos. Also, I think who you surround yourself with is the most important thing. I think you shouldn't, the moment you hang out with someone that constantly complains about their day, it takes a really good manifester to not let that affect them.
Yeah.
And I think when I was just starting, I wasn't there yet. I would listen to people complain about something and I'd be like, oh, how come I have it so easy? Like, why is everything always, it became like, oh, maybe it's not working out for me. And then immediately the next day would be a terrible day. And I'm not blaming people for that, but I think for me, the people I surround myself with now are all getting into manifesting, and we only talk high vibe talks. We don't talk about, like, it's very common for girl groups to gossip. My friend group, if someone has like, we're like, nope, not our monkey, not our circus, like that is our vibe. We're talking about our own dreams, like where do you want to see yourself in 5 years? And I never thought like a South Asian group of girls would never gossip. Like, I think that is the craziest manifesting I've done. Like, I've manifested the most high vibe group of girls in my life.
So my second to last question is a bit of an open-ended question. I've honestly had a pleasure learning about manifestation over the past 3 weeks, but because I'm only 3 weeks into sort of that reading journey, there's probably a lot that I just don't know about. So is there anything that I didn't cover that would be worth bringing up in terms of whether it's baseline stuff for anybody getting into manifestation, or even it could be more advanced stuff that, you've like recently encountered that would be worth sharing?
No, I think you covered everything. I would say I would just rank the levels now. So I think The Secret is your gateway.
Yeah.
Abraham Hicks is a really good second. I actually think Joe Dispenza's third. And then fourth, there's Neville Goddard. He's actually the father of manifestation. He's the OG. His lectures are like from the early 1900s. So he's also a Christian philosopher. So manifestation scours through so many different religions. He takes Bible interpretations and kind of really lectures you on that. Now he's my favorite to listen to, and I started listening to him, and my mom was like, this is too advanced for me. Now it's her favorite as well. Joe Dispenza, if you're a very science analytical mind, I would definitely say listen to Joe. I think he is the best for that stuff. He also, like, I think meditation, but kind of like the Vedic practices of meditation are so under appreciated. I never thought I could manifest. I have ADHD. I'm very hyper. I'm very talkative. I meditate for 20 minutes a day. So I never thought I'd be that person. When I tell you, I felt like I have jumped timelines or like jumped into another realm at certain points. Like, I forget where I am. I forget where my body is. Like, it is the craziest experiences that I've had meditating, and the manifestations that I've had right after that have always just come true.
Wow. And my last question is something that I ask everyone. So the podcast is called Improving Humans. And I feel like manifestation is already a big topic that's helped you improve as an individual. But in case there was anything else, is there a quote, an idea, or a concept that has helped you improve as a person? It could be related to manifestation. It could be anything else. Really.
Yeah, it's actually the center of my vision board for January. So I do a main vision board, and then I do one for each month that I have like as my phone screen.
Oh, cool.
Because it makes the goals less, daunting. But my current favorite quote is, what if it doesn't work out? But what if it does? So I think that is kind of just like especially if you were formerly negative person turned positive, it really like flips the switch on how you want to think about things.